CR101radio.com, podcasts, and more. And welcome back to another episode of The Last Kingdom. I am your host, Jeremy Walker. This is episode number 25 for October the 18th, 2024. The name of this episode is entitled, What Happened to All the Violence? On this episode, we'll be discussing the basic concepts revolving around how violence has been reduced. We'll be discussing, hopefully, Halloween, youth restrictions, building Christian outposts, and is the government controlling the weather? Well, let's go ahead and get started on this podcast as we discuss our faith, our families, and the futures, and of course, where it's going to lead us. So, I want to thank everybody for giving me a minute of your time. I'm talking a little bit off the cuff, a little bit less prepared. We just went through here in Southwest Florida a couple of different hurricanes and what we call natural disasters. We had Hurricane Helene come through Florida and work its way up to North Carolina. And then right on the heels of Hurricane Helene, we had Hurricane Milton. And of course, it's kind of funny when you stop and ask yourself a couple questions about media and what we're hearing on the news and making preparations, because the idea that governments have high-intensity lasers and they're shooting them from the sky to direct hurricanes, to make them bigger, to direct their path. They're dropping phosphorus in the skies to create storms. Everybody loves a conspiracy theory. And I'm not going to be one who says it, people don't try. Everybody likes to try. You can get a rain stick if you go to certain Indian reservations, and you're supposed to be able to understand that back in the old days, the shamans would try to summon the rain by having a rain dance and calling down the rains from the pagan gods, who would then rain down upon them a blessing of water. Well, you can believe anything you want. Me, I'm going to go simple on my Christian faith. And it says that God, not man, is in control of the world. It doesn't mean that God doesn't allow men at certain times to act and kind of influence certain things. It's not too far-fetched to think that we couldn't build a dam to then redirect water and create the Hoover Dam to create power and lots of other things that we can create ingenuity to manipulate and to utilize. The difference being, is it out of control? And no, it's not out of control. It's crazy. In fact, if you were going to ask yourself, how much power do governments have concerning natural disasters? Well, if you were around whenever we had Hurricane Katrina and people went into the Superdome, it took them over a week to just get water into the Superdome. These people, these bureaucrats, are so teethless. In North Carolina, they found out that, oh my gosh, we don't have any funds for FEMA, an organization designed on purpose to help federal emergency management and handling disasters throughout the United States of America. I found from living in Florida that the last person you want to go to for help is the government. FEMA is not somebody that I say is useless. I would just say they're not reliable or potentially competent. Or a better way to look at it, they don't have your interest at heart, especially where your money is concerned. If we saw what the federal government was doing, they have no problem dumping money across the ocean in other nations, which is what I would like to call the old concept of embezzlement, where you take funds and put them to ill-gained uses. So that means that every person involved should be rounded up and put on trial and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Will they? No, they won't. And as Christians, we have to just continue to move on. This is a judgment upon our nation. However, there were many, many people who decided to step up and help North Carolina because North Carolina is not ready for such natural disasters, or what we call natural disasters. There was devastation on a level that was unseen of or even thought could happen. However, here in Florida, we were told that Helene was going to be horrible and terrible, and it wasn't. Whenever Milton came around, those people who were in the evacuation zones, which I was and my home was here in Southwest Florida, we were told from the media, if you're in one of these zones, you will not survive. You are not going to survive. You must run. You must flee. Did we survive? Well, I sat on my porch and we watched the wind blow, and we got a little bit of rain, and we did get some storm surge thanks to the tides and whatnot. We went out and looked, nothing, and went to bed, and storm went by, a little bit of howling, and when we woke up in the morning, the clouds were gone. There was no more wind. There was no flooding. There were not mass casualties with everybody dead in our area. And we only had one palm tree that was down even in our neighborhood that we saw. So there was some storm surge. So some people's homes got a little bit of water in them, but no loss of life. And so you kind of have to be careful with these subject matters. It is God, not man, who is in charge. These people like to tout the power of man. No, we don't. We are the ant on the anthill, hoping to be something bigger when we're not. And it's just important. I think Christians, we need to have this perspective. You properly plan, you take reasonable precautions, absolutely. But don't have or take precautions without faith. That's super important. Even if you did get hit by a Category 5 hurricane. And I was right in the eye of one during Irma here in Southwest Florida. And that is a scary thing. But we came out okay. And Florida, it has building codes. And say what you will about government overreach, but I have to say, building codes is one I agree with, especially when you are going to buy a house in Florida. You want somebody who built it right. And guess what? The homes in Florida are built to withstand hurricane levels of 4 and 5. No problem. Happens all the time. Only things that are not up to what we would call code, those things get destroyed. Or if there's flooding, that's a different subject. Or like one of our schools here in Southwest Florida had a touchdown from a tornado. Now that's a different subject. Tornadoes are not hurricanes, and I'm glad I live in Florida and not in Hurricane or Tornado Alley and other places. Places where these things come down, and they call it the finger of God for a reason. And it ripped through. I've never seen the devastation it can cause from just a little tornado jumping around all over the place. It is massive damage. Now that is something to be truly, truly scared of. Hurricanes, not so much. But having faith, even in destruction, people can say, well, thank God. We saw a Bible opened up after the disaster, and the church was standing in the middle of the devastation. This proves God was present in the storm. This is such silly, ridiculous notions. God wasn't in the storm. He created the storm. He directed the storm. It did exactly what he wanted it to do. That means it may have skipped you. It may have kept you safe. It may have devastated you. It may have destroyed your family. It may have killed your family. And that's what God wanted. That's right. See, that's good Christian theology. They want to tout the good things and say, God's hand was in all these wonderful things. We're saved. Well, what about God's hand when you're not saved and you become part of the tragedy? When you, like many people in North Carolina, have to watch your loved ones swept away, and now they're gone. Does that shake your faith? Does that mean that you think God was sleeping on that day when these things took place? Do you think God didn't plan properly or know it was going to happen, or these happened against his will? No. The story of Job is our story for such times. And you must have faith, and you must have hope. Yes, in devastation, as equal as good times as well. Job's answer, whenever a tornado, at least it sounded like a tornado, took down his house and killed 10 of his children, then he lost his health, and then he lost his wealth. His wife told him to curse God and die, and his answer instead was, though God slay me, Yet will I trust him. Not that he would understand him. Not necessarily that he was happy with the results of what took place. But he understood that God is doing things above what we understand. And that's what the entire book of Job is about. That's what worship is about. So don't be concerned about the government. Be concerned about God. Obey him, trust him. And all things, the Bible says, will work out for your benefit, including tragedy. Well, the question that I posed at the beginning with the title of this episode is called, What Happened to All the Violence? I watched a podcast episode. Well, I think it was a scientist, astrophysicist, Neil Dyson, I think his name is. He was being interviewed. He's a smart guy, and he knows a lot of interesting stuff. But there's one thing that he came across, which I thought wasn't actually an intellectual thing, but was a point of fact. He said, if 10 to 15 people die today, that can not only make local headlines and national headlines, it can make worldwide headlines. Just 10 people, 10 to 15 people in today's dates. However, in the concept of history, there were people during certain times where there were 100 or 1,000 people dying every minute during certain world wars and whatnot. And me, in my lifetime, I've never experienced a world war. Just in my lifetime. I was born in 1980. The world has gotten better. And this wasn't my analysis. This was an atheist, non-Christian analysis of historical record. That mankind, death rate is going down as due to tragedy and specifically wars. In other words, the world is getting to be a better place overall, slowly but surely. When you read about the revolutions that took place, like the French Revolution, they were murdering people and chopping off their heads. They were chopping off their genitalia, and they were putting them on spikes and parading them around the village. These were horrible, disgusting times. In America, people talk about the Native Americans as if they were these soft, quiet people who then had their land invaded. No, many of them were tribal, murderous people who would scalp people, rip out their hearts. These weren't kind peoples. When the settlers came to America and they encountered such people, these weren't just people butchering Indians. These were Indians butchering the settlers. And, of course, the rest is history. It goes back and forth, not just in American history, all across the world, full of violence. Genghis Khan, communism, millions upon millions upon millions. They talk about what happened in Germany, what they call the Holocaust. What happened during communism in Russia was so far worse. So many people were murdered for the concept of communism and socialism and the rest. And it doesn't get into all the other places around the world where there were skulls lining the roads. What do we have today? We have people arguing back and forth. They might have a little effigy where they show that they dislike somebody. They might call somebody a name. Oh, and today, what's the real big thing that politicians are fighting against? Memes on the internet. Oh my goodness, somebody made fun of you. You know, they can't even, right now, we have nobody even trying to do violence. It's a rarity. When Donald Trump has been tried to be assassinated recently, that was a new thing. And didn't even succeed. See, the thing is that people are actually getting better. They're not getting worse. Now, an interesting question that Dyson raised, the fact of it, is what is causing all of this? You know, why is it that humanity in general, the violence around the globe, is weakening and weakening and weakening to the point that even during the pandemic, what they called the pandemic, they didn't jail anybody. They didn't bring out the guns and shoot anybody. In fact, they don't even do that anymore. But why is it that they don't? Why is it that governments have gotten better? Why is it we can go to wars, but you don't even hear about casualties? We hear about the Ukrainian-Russian war, but you don't hear about any of the casualties that are being had there. We had wars that America went to. And how many casualties? A handful here and there. Nothing. Not hundreds upon thousands of people dying. So, let's go to a verse to answer the question and explain why this is happening. In Isaiah chapter 2, it says, "The word that Isaiah the son of Amoz saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and it shall be exalted above the hills, and all the nations shall flow into it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come ye, and let us walk in the light of the Lord." Unquote. This is the reason why the world is getting better. Christ has come. He was the promised Messiah who would lead the nations. In the book of Acts, it is Paul who talks about how all the nations in the times in the past, God winked at the things they did, their paganisms. But now all men are called to repent, and all nations are going to be pushed into the kingdom. That is what's going on. That is why nations and violence are dropping and dropping and dropping, including in America. All the violence we hear about right now, the vast majority of it, where is it coming from around the world? Is it coming from nations who were influenced by Christianity? Or is it nations where they're importing people who are still on the lower rung of pagan influence, third world countries who have less Christian influence, and these are the violent ones murdering and chopping people up in the streets and raping little girls. That's what you see. The less the Christian influence, the more the violence. The greater the Christian influence, the less the violence. So if you want to stop violence in your community, in your school, in your nation, and the world, we need to give it a Christian influence. And I mentioned schools a second ago. It's not a shock and reason why we're having school shootings when you've taken step by step to remove Christian influence from our schools all throughout America and the world. And the students are responding in kind. You asked for less restriction on violence, and they're going to give it to you. And that is the problem. The Christian influence needs to come back before these things will stop. If you want to keep going down your road, you're going to expect more violence. And some people, the vast majority of them, they would rather live in hell than serve in heaven. And that is also a major key to what you're seeing and to understanding what's going on with bringing in all the foreigners. They hate the Christian influence in America today, and they want to do everything they can to destroy that. I know it's not going to work, but they are in the final throes of being pushed into the kingdom. They are the wild animal caught in the snare, and they are gnawing at anything that comes by, and including gnawing off their own leg to try to get out of the trap. It's not going to work. On the heels of evil and violence, switching to a new subject, Halloween is upon us, coming up All Hallows Eve. And I saw Christians have taken out the drum, and boy, are they beating it loudly. Halloween decorations are going up, and this is now the pinnacle of evil. If you see Halloween decorations going up, then you know where the evil is at. These are the horrible people. This is the evil, the spirit of Halloween and the evils thereof. Well, you know, these are decorations. I'm not saying that people should enjoy putting up skulls and celebrating murder through, watching murderous movies or putting them in their yards and stuff like that. But that's not where the evil's at. The evil is in the lukewarmness. In the book of Revelations, the one thing that Christ says he despises above all else was lukewarm people. There's the good, there's the evil, and there's the middle, the people who try to be on the fence. This would be, lack of a better term, most Christians. Yeah, the fakers, people in churches claiming to honor God and not doing it, putting their kids into government schools where they're going to be taught to hate God, despise Him, and break every commandment that He has with joy. You want to see real evil? It's not found in pumpkins, and it's not found in skeletons made of plastic and fake blood and candy being passed out to children who say, trick or treat. No, here's the real trick. If you want to find where the evil's at, it's usually going to be those people who have a good talk, but don't have a Christian walk. You want to put your focus somewhere this Halloween? Don't be talking against pumpkins and things like that. Talk about sin. Talk about fidelity to God and His commandments and to your family. Talk about people how their works have to match up with their professions of faith. But that won't happen. Because why? We have the wolves on the insides of the churches, and they're going to talk about Halloween and how you know you're not a bad person because you don't pass out candy. In fact, we're going to have a Reformation Day. We're going to dress up as Bible characters instead. So little Billy, he can't dress up like a G.I. Joe. No. He can't dress up like Captain America and go get candy door to door. Instead, to be good, godly Christians, what we're going to do, we are going to have a place where at our church, we're going to put our cars and we're going to open up all the trunks. And in the trunks, we're going to have candy. And little Tommy, he can be dressed as David, or he can be dressed as Solomon, or he can come as Jonah, and Joseph and Mary. And then they're going to come get candy, and we're going to talk about all the little Reformation eggs at Easter time instead. See, they try to supplant these holidays for another holiday, and they still miss the boat. They're still going to take their kids and not teach them God's commandments. They're still not going to obey God themselves. Lukewarm people. Yeah, you don't get closer to God by changing how you celebrate certain festivities. You get closer to God by actually doing that. Repenting of sin, learning God's law so you can understand what you're supposed to do, and then do that. And teach others to do it as well. Halloween's not your problem. Sin is your problem. And getting rid of Halloween and its little celebrational characteristics isn't going to get rid of sin in the community, or in your home, or in your heart, which is the real problem. We talked about youth restrictions with somebody another topic, and I mentioned how my family has restrictions on our children where they can't have social media, they can't have access to Facebook, TikTok, internet, any of that kind of stuff until they're 18. And I met somebody who didn't like that idea. Or at least I got the impression they didn't. And most people don't. They think that you should trust your children. If you teach them correctly, then they will know what's right and wrong. And I trust my child. I gave them a good education. They know logic. They know reason. And they know God's commandments. And they know what they're supposed to do and not do. I trust my child. I trust my child. I trust my family. Well, you're a fool. Your child has a dual nature, even if they are a Christian. And that nature wars against the good, and it wants to do evil. And so for me, my status is very simple. Until you are ready for adult consequences, then you're not ready to have access to adult choices to make. Until then, your parents, they are the ones who are supposed to protect you. And the person you've protected from the most. They are not people controlling the weather. They are not violent men out there controlling governments. It's not Halloween candy and other celebrations that are going to be something you need protection from. It's yourself. It's your sin. It's you. You are your problem. I am my problem. And that's what we have to get through our thick skulls and through the thick skulls of our children. But they don't want to believe that, and neither do you. But what happened to all the violence? Well, simple. God happened. His plan for redemption happened, and we can rest, oh, so comfortably, knowing that God is on the throne. He's got it all under control, and we don't have to worry. Do your job, love your family, obey God, and live a blessed life and bless others. Thank you for joining me again on The Last Kingdom. We'll be back in another week. Thank you and God bless.